I don't know if I'll get up today. I don't know if I'll give one single today. My whole outlook is sunken gray, and I have no idea why I woke up this way. Got my phone in my right hand, my books on the nightstand. If I unlock and I app pop, I'm stuck there, I'm a dead man. So Lord, give me the strength to please read one page. If it works in any way, I'll move on to the next thing, oh dear. I got my socks on, I'm coming up.
Welcome to Positively Undefeated. This is a podcast that talks about the day-to-day struggle ordinary people have over their demons and how each day they remain positively undefeated. We share ideas and ways that you can empower yourself to remain strong so that you can embrace the journey of living.
Brother, I sure appreciate you taking the time. I actually just got through listening. I was on your second episode. It's so funny. I had it playing of your podcast. And of course, I've got 2 or 3 people, my wife and kids. And anyway, so we're listening to it. And it was talking about, ironically, getting older. And then I sit down at this computer where I can just, it feels like I just stare at myself. And I'm like,
yeah, for sure.
Getting older.
Getting old.
This is like,
for sure.
like, well, let me first of all give a shout out to people. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is Positively Undefeated. If you guys haven't had a chance, go to your favorite podcasting app with Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, several others. Make sure you like our podcast, follow it, and reviews are great. And also, if you haven't had a chance, go to our website, evenoneless.com. You can find contact information, email, phone number, and a lot of resources about things we have going on. And just in case you need some help or you have a question, reach out that way. Guys, I want to, this is Jared. Jared, tell me your last name. I don't even know your last name.
My last name is Chow Fant. It's if I was to spell it out for people, it gets so messed up so badly. But it's French. So when people see it, they're like, "Oh my gosh, what do I do?"
Where do you live?
It's so simple. I'm in Michigan. I'm up in Michigan. I'm originally from Ohio, and then transplanted up to Michigan in 2018, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. Well, brother, I sure do appreciate you being on the podcast. And, you know, I met you. It's kind of interesting. Basically, we met through TikTok and, you know, I watched some of your videos and, you know, I really, it's funny because I really like the theme of even with your podcast. And your podcast is called the Brotherhood Mentality Mission.
Yeah. Yep.
Spotify. And I found it really easy. And honestly, man, I listened to the first episode. I enjoyed it. You do something that I struggle with big time, which is just me being on the podcast. It's probably, and I don't know why exactly. I can't explain it, but I give you a lot of props because I thought it was good. And I get also what you were saying about, like you were talking about that basically your wife says you know, all over the place. And
you're right, for sure. For sure.
I think one thing that helps me with that is, you know, being able to talk to guests. And so,
right.
So I thought you did a great job, man. I enjoyed it. And for you guys listening, if you haven't, go there, go to Spotify, check out his podcast. I don't know. I love the name of it. Tell me what made you start like, hey, I'm going to do this podcast and the name of it. Because honestly, on TikTok, when I went to your profile and I looked at it, it said, I think the same thing. And dude, I was like, okay, I want to know more about this guy. So, and I'm curious why.
Well, okay. So we have to rewind a little bit back to, I'd say 2021. In 2020, one of the best things that came out of the year, you know, it was the COVID year. Everybody was down and sick and stuff. My wife and I got married in September of 2021. So that was really awesome. Moving into 2021, we were like, we're missing something. Our family is we're a blended family. She has 2 kids. I have 2 kids. Now we have 4 altogether. And I was like, as a family, we're missing something. She agreed. And I was like, we need to start going to church. We were both faithful people, but we were what I refer to as a CEO Christian. And that's Christmas, Easter only. Yeah. You know, we'd hit the big ones.
I called it other. Christmas or one other.
Right. So we started going. We went to a couple of different churches and tried some out, and then found the church that we call home now, and just fell in love with it. And what really got my fire going is the first pastor that was there. The first time we were there in person, we did one virtual online, watch their sermon because they were still doing that because we were kind of coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
And so we went and we sat all the way in the back because, new kids on the block, we don't want to be up front. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and right in the middle of his sermon, he was talking about having receptive soil and the importance of that, being able to absorb and kind of accept the Holy Spirit and understand what's being done around you and being, and he stops in the middle of his in a sermon and he looks, I swear to you, right at me. And he said, "You're never too small for God to use you." And brother, man, I'm telling you, like a lightning bolt struck me in my chest. It moved me.
Yeah.
It really did. And so we went a couple more times. Fast forward a little bit. We went out to dinner with him and he's like, "What are you into? What are you passionate about?" I've been a welder now for 23 years. Yeah. And I could have been
I want to talk about that in a bit.
All right. He said, "What are you passionate about?" And I could have said welding. I love to cook, grilling, smoking, all that stuff. Yeah. And I looked at him and I said, "Teaching." And he was kind of caught off because he knew what I did for a living. And we finished our lunch and stuff. We left and in my head was like, teaching. Why of all things did I say teaching? So a couple years down the road, I started I have a men's group at our church and it's called Breaking the Mentality of Mantality. And I got the ball rolling on that. And I went to a church function and this preacher was there and he was talking about how he spreads the word. He doesn't do so much preaching in church. Like he's not a primary pastor of a church. He does podcasts. And I was like, man, that's a great idea, a way for me to reach out to people that's not in my community to spread the word and kind of help guys with that stuff that we carry that we don't like talking about.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, I know like you realizing you're talking about, hey, I want to go to church and that whole thing. Do you think that something like there was a point in your life where like, I call it like spiritual awakening or an aha moment where, this event happens and sometimes it's a little thing, sometimes it's a big thing, something, a lot of times if it's a little, it may have been culminating over several years or something, but is there something that you can name or what do you think?
I would say it was culminating over several years. I mean, even going back to childhood, my dad, when I was really young, we went to church faithfully. And as I got older, we stopped going to church and I was like, okay, we just don't go to church anymore. But my dad, I can remember every day he would always read his daily bread, his daily devotional, but he didn't really have those conversations with me. Like I did my own thing. He did his own thing. We had a great relationship, but he would drop what I would call crumbs of faith along the way. Mm-hmm. And some of them were really impactful that stuck with me forever. I talk about one of them in my podcast. Sin in the mind, the same as the sin in the flesh, man, that really messed me up. I was like 12 years old. Wow. And then I went through a divorce and it was a rough patch for me. I prayed going through the divorce, for God to fix this, help me out, And then one night I was sitting in a hotel and instead of praying for God to fix it, I said, you know what? I said, make her be happy. If this is the direction this is going to go, let her be happy. And whatever she ends up doing, help me move on. Mm-hmm. And I did. And then I met my wife, Sarah. And man, I tell you what, I talk about her a lot in the podcast. I truly believe the aha moment was when her and I got together. Mm-hmm. She changed the direction of my life so much. I don't think I would be where I am and doing what I'm doing without her in my life. Because she pushes me, not saying she's pushy, but she pushes me to do what we feel the Holy Spirit is telling me to do. When I feel compelled to do something, she stands behind me. She's like, yeah, let's go for it. Do it. I said, I wanted to do the podcast. And she's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I was like, I want to start doing some stuff on social media, Facebook, and TikTok, and I just started an Instagram account today, just trying to spread the word of what I'm trying to do to help the guys out there.
Yeah. Wow. So a topic that comes up a lot with guys I know, friends, we talk about a lot, seems like frequently on the podcast, is this idea is that men were designed for war.
Yeah, I heard that podcast you sent me with Christopher. Yep.
And you get my point, is the stronger, the provider, the hunter gatherer, and I think a lot of men, like, first of all, for them to really realize that that's kind of ingrained in them, I think that takes time. I think guys fight it off in different ways sometimes. And then, but also, there's also, I think, at some point, a realization that you're not going to be like our great grandfathers who went to World War II and the greatest generation ever. You're not going to be, you're not going to be that guy on Braveheart. I brought that up last time.
Right.
But, we're not. And so I think that this, it creates a void for men or something. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it is. I don't know how it was when you were growing up, and I'm sure it was probably a little bit of the same, that that rub some dirt in it mentality to, almost like to suppress it and push it down. Men are the take charge kind of guy. I think by nature we want to fix it.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about it, but we want to fix it, whatever that looks like, whatever that, and we're afraid. A song, Carrie Underwood says, "Jesus, take the wheel."
Oklahoma. Yes.
Guys don't like doing that. I still, knowing what I know and doing the research that I've done, and it hasn't been a lot, but I mean, it's enough to know what I'm talking about. I still struggle with letting go and letting faith be and having the faith that it's going to be all right.
Yeah.
And I think when one of the things guys need to realize is that they are the leader of their family. More is caught than taught. So when you start going in a certain direction, your family's going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the Pied Piper, not taking anything away from the intelligence of the family, but like monkey see, monkey do. If I act a certain way, the kids, the family, they're going to act a certain way as well.
Yeah.
So we have to know that's going on. If you smoke cigarettes or you chew or you drink, when your kids grow up, they're going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Both my parents smoked when I was growing up and I was a kid. I smoked for 20 years. That was the thing to do. It's not as cool as it once was, but, so you got to realize that you are the leader. You are the alpha in the house. Right. But there's such a difference between being an alpha in your faith and with God and an alpha of worldly senses.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think your ministry and what you're trying to do, it is towards men? I mean, it's clear, right?
Yep, absolutely.
The number one answer to why? What do you think in your mind? Why did you want to minister to men? And it's not
because I know
it's just really, I'm curious what drove that.
So I know how
it could have been dads, it could have been couples, it could have been anybody, it could have been a lot of things, but you chose men specifically.
I chose men specifically because I know what it feels like to be alone, to carry burdens and heartbreak and everything else, and to just feel completely, absolutely alone, especially when it comes to things that you can't control. Mm-hmm. And I know that men, so I did a little bit of what I called a social experiment one time in church. When I launched my men's group at church, I got up in front of the congregation and we announced what I was going to try to do. And I asked the men in the church, I said, how many of you have ever struggled with work, finance, relationship with your spouse, your kids? And there was a lot of things, I listed off there, and I said, by show of hands, how many? And almost every male's hand went up. I said, okay, second question. How many of you like talking about it? And not like crickets, literal crickets, not a single hand went up. And I said, and that's why I'm starting this group, because we carry and deal with so much stuff up here in our head that the statistics of suicide in men and alcohol abuse and drug abuse, gambling, cheating on your spouse is just off the charts in comparison to women. However, women are statistically have a higher percentage of depression rates than men do. And those things don't equate. We equate for 75% of suicides, but women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's great.
And it's because
I swear, I think I know the percentages. I'm sure you did enough research to know that suicide is a big deal. To me.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah, and
nobody,
all of it, you know.
And nobody talks about it because it's sad. I mean, any death is sad, right? But when these guys are, and I don't want to say taking the easy way out, but feeling like they have nowhere else to turn because they got so much going on upstairs in their head that's affecting their heart that they just turn to ending it.
Yeah.
It's a sad statistic, and it's a scary statistic, and it's not just the suicide. I mean, there's so many other things attached to it, gambling and drugs and alcohol, drinking. You know, I used to drink quite a bit, and I talk about it in one of my podcasts that my mom was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic, recovering. I mean, you never like cured, right? That's always a battle.
Yeah.
And when she would drink, she would get depressed or mean. And I was like, I'm not like my mom. I drink to have a good time. But I didn't know when to quit.
Yeah.
And I got a conviction for what I'm doing you don't need to drink anymore. Like, there's more, you can get more from me, the Holy Spirit. Like, I can get more from God than I could ever get from a beer or a bottle of liquor.
Mm-hmm.
So I just up one day and was like, I was on let me tell you a real quick story. I was on the fence about it. Like, my dad once told me, he said, what are you missing out here that could jeopardize eternity in heaven? And that was one of them little cookies he dropped. And I was like, ooh, that's pretty heavy, Dad.
Yeah.
So I was on the fence about quitting drinking. And, you know, I still had the mindset, like, I don't have a problem. So one of the things that I would always turn to when cooking out, barbecuing or smoking something, I'd always drink.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the winter time. It was cold outside, but it happened to just be a warm day. And I took advantage of it. I was like, I'm going to grill something on the grill. And so I went out to the refrigerator to grab a beer, and I came in and opened it, and it was frozen. Mm-hmm. And I was like, my first instinct was run under hot water. It'll thaw out. It'll be terrible, but it'll thaw out. And then I paused for a moment, and I was like, maybe there's a reason that this is frozen. Mm-hmm. So I turned it upside down in the sink, and I ain't touched the drink since.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's great. Let's talk about the welding. I think it's cool. So to give you a little background why I'm even interested, I heard you say it on your podcast, and because I was curious what you did. You said you worked out of town, and anyway, now I got it. But I come from a long line of welders. My dad's a welder. My best friend's a welder. I'd say I'm a hobby welder, but I think that's cool. I like that.
Yeah. My dad, growing up, my dad had a fabrication shop, and he lost it in 2002. And what got him started was working on the pipeline back in the 80s during the oil boom. And once he lost his business, he went back to pipelining. So welding was all I knew. So I was just working in a factory, like a production welding factory. And he came over one weekend from being out off the road, and he was like, you like welding? And I was like, that's all I know how to do, Dad. He said, you like making money? And I was like, yeah. He goes, you want to make a lot of money? And I said, sure. He said, I'm going to teach you how to weld pipe, and the rest is history. I've been doing it for 16 years, but I've been on the road a lot, and I've been on the road a lot more frequent than I have been in years past. And it's been a struggle. It's my wife, she is my rock, and she handles things with taking care of 4 kids, working full time, getting them where they need to be, making sure they're taken care of, so on and so forth. I think I would lose my mind, but man, she stepped up to the plate, did what she had to do. And, it was a struggle at first before they kind of found a routine. My kids are a little bit older, so they're not so dependent on, it's not like they're bottle fed or anything like that, but it was tough. It was really tough.
Yeah, I actually want to dive into that because I talk about that a lot as well, because for a while now, I worked a lot out of town. So I'd work out of town. I'd usually I'd do something like work 5 days there and stay overnight, and then I'd come home and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And, really but if you listen to the last podcast, so I basically quit drinking. I had a major up and quit drinking, and quit my job the next day.
Really?
Because through that process, I realized that it wasn't good for me at that moment, at that time. You know what I mean? And I do a lot of contract stuff. So, it's not like real employment, but it is. And so even to this day, which is 3 years later or something like that, I do not like staying out of town. I do not, and let me tell you, like, could I? Yes. And would I not go off the rock? Nothing like that. But the point is that I just feel like that's a good boundary for me.
Yeah. Having those boundaries are important for sure.
When I heard that whenever I realized that you work out of town a lot, I'm curious how you deal with that. Because men, you've heard it, men lonely, men bored, men, I'll throw helpless in there. They never say that, but I'll say that, hungry, they put themselves in a really bad place. And
Absolutely.
I know I have, I think about the number of work trips and the, whatever. I'm divorced as well and married.
Yeah.
And I think about, man, I didn't act my best on those things either. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Almost like this freedom. I look,
right.
I think about it. When I do, because I have 5 kids, so I understand everything you're talking about when you were talking about being a dad. I get it, because I truly do. I'm very much a part of my kids' lives and love being around them and all that. They're older than yours, but the point is that, man, that I look back on that and I'm like, man, and I just had to set it as a boundary for me at this moment in my life, and not saying I know I'll do it again, but it's just at this moment, I still don't like it. I think it's one of my personal boundaries. I feel like I'm at my best when I come home every night. So I'm curious how you do it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I do it a lot different now than I used to. I was never unfaithful to my first wife. I worked the first 4 years that I worked in pipeline. I was on the road constantly. I'd work 5-6 days, come home, do laundry, make food for the next week, pack up. Monday morning, I was gone again. I was never unfaithful to her, but man, did I drink a lot. Like a ridiculous amount. So much so that she was like, I think you have a problem. And I was like, no, I'm fine. And our marriage ultimately ended. And I was at home for the first couple of years that my wife and I, Sarah, were married. And then work kind of got slow in the area that I was working. So they started sending me out of town, like a month here, 2 months here, a couple weeks here, nothing major. Well, for the last 17, 18 months, I've been on the road, and it's been, this is the time that I'm not drinking. Right. And that used to be my go-to. I'd work all day, go back to the hotel, drink beer or whatever with the guys, hang out, get drunk at night, hoot and holler, never do anything completely out of offhand. Right. But still like almost living a college life. Right.
Yeah.
So when I went out of town, I was like, okay, so I'm going to focus on not being that guy anymore. So I started working out, and trying to eat better. and I focused that drinking energy on going to the gym. Like when I was out of town, I was going to the gym Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, sometimes Thursday, back to not allowing myself to have time to let my guard down. And I feel like some of it was a bit of a trial, because there was times that the guys, I work with all day would be like, hey, come out with us. We're going over to so-and-so barbecue joint, have a couple beers with us. And I turned them down. I can't tell you how many times. And then my wife's like, you should go out with them. And I was like, I don't want to drink. She's like, don't drink. And I was like, okay, easier said than done. Right. So I went out the first time with them. I actually went out on my 40th birthday. And I didn't I'm not one of the guys that's like, hey, it's my birthday. Like, I didn't say anything. Yeah. And we went out and everybody got their beer, and I got an unsweet iced tea with no lemon. That's kind of my go-to. And they're like, you don't drink? And I said, no. I said, I don't drink. I said, I used to, but I said, because of where I'm at in my life and what I'm trying to do, I said, I quit drinking. And they're like, oh, and then that was it. Like, they never pressured, I told them about my faith and working with different people. One of the things about being a welder is I'm never on the same crew. It's never the same set of 3, 4, 5 guys. I'm always with different people all the time. And I witness, I talk about my faith, or I'll just simply mention, this weekend, they're like, what'd you do this weekend? Oh, I did this. And then Sunday we went to church, and then they're like, oh, you go to church. And then sometimes it sparks a conversation, and sometimes you get an eye roll and you move on to the conversation, not so much beating them with the Bible, but, just dropping those crumbs like my dad did to me that convicted me over time. But yeah, there was one night in particular, it was the first football game of the season, college football. There's like 5 or 6 games going on that night, and they're like, hey, come up to the room, we're gonna be drinking beer, and I was like, I don't want to come up. I talked to my wife. She's like, oh, hang out with them, you'll be fine. I was like, okay. And then I was like, man, maybe I'll just go get a 6-pack, no big deal. Like, nobody's got, no big deal. No. And I was in the parking lot of the gas station, and I was like, don't do it. Just don't, because 6 is going to turn into, hey man, anybody got any more beer? And then, spiral out of control again. So I left the gas station, went back to the hotel. I think I ended up going to the gym. And then, I did go up to the room for a little bit. We watched a little bit of football. I think Colorado was playing Colorado State or something, and watched a little bit of football. About 9:30 that night, one of the other guys I was working with that was playing softball, he was from that area. He tore his quad muscle, and he needed somebody to drive him to the hospital. And if I would have been drinking, I'd have never went and got him. And he texted me. He's like, hey, I need somebody to take me. And I was like, I'll come get you. He's like, no, don't worry about it. I said, look, I'm not drinking. I don't, and I said, I'll come get you. So I feel like that was a sign you made the right decision, because, 6 beers turned into 12 beers. And then he calls and says, hey man, I need a ride. I can't help him out, but I was able to help him because I made the right decision. And there was kind of that solidified, just stay on the course you're on. And that's what I did. So I do podcasts, I make the videos, I work out, and I watch TV. Like I stay in my own little bubble, and that too can be dangerous, because then you get in your own head, and sometimes solidarity is a very scary place, and
that's the first sign of trouble, isolation.
Yeah, isolation is one of the ways the devil comes to get you, is keep you by yourself.
That's definitely. But I have a few thoughts. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have
you're good.
Thoughts about what you were saying. One, and this is semi-funny but serious. My advice to you: never drink again. It's the stupidest thing ever. Yeah. And I mean that. And I mean, people around me drink still, and I'm not judging it, but I just realize how stupid it is, over these last few years. And the second thought, man, and I think, you have a great way when you talk about God and you talk about spiritual stuff, you have a great way of being very, I don't want to use the word simple, but I want to use I think just very down to earth. And then, when I'm listening to you on the podcast, I'm hearing you talk now, every time you mention God, you mention spiritual stuff, that you have a great way of being very down to earth. And I think that my thoughts for you, man, is that I hope you always continue that, because I think what the world is kind of sick of is these churchy words and these the religious. I have no clue, and I don't want to know. I have no clue what denomination you are. I don't want to know, don't care. And I think that, and part of it is that you made it that way already because I didn't have to, you didn't say it, you didn't talk about it, you didn't say anything crazy religious, you didn't, you know what I mean? And brother, I think that that is a superpower that you have is being able to talk about those things without getting all churchy and using words that nobody uses anymore. You know,
Right.
that we say all the time in the church deal. And it's just being able to talk plain about it. And man, and you also bring a part how part of your story is your testimony and the things you're talking about. And those things are real. You know, it's better than preaching. It's better
Hmm.
than it truly is. And so, right,
Hmm.
I think you have a pretty cool superpower there. And I just encourage you to continue. Just you don't have to fake it. Just continue to do what you're doing and refine that. And man, I think
Yeah.
you're that's a winner.
And I think that's one of the callings that I had, and the reason I feel so passionate about it, because I know what it's like to look at a whitewashed Christian that looks down at you over their nose because you don't look or talk or act or the way they want you to. They forgot that Jesus tells us to love them where they are, not where you want them to be. I have earrings, I have tattoos. In some churches, when you walk in and you look like that, they look at you like, what are you doing here? You don't belong. And that hypocrisy of the Christian faith is what spoils so many people in the faith. Because the old saying, you don't take a car that's not broke to a mechanic.
Right.
That's why we go to church, is to fix things. So I feel like I was put in a position to do the things that I'm doing and talk to the people that I talk to, because these people are tired of that churchy way that people go about it. I'm a common person. I'm a simple guy. I'm a little bit of a hillbilly, and I got a story. A lot of times pastors, they grow up in the church. Their dad was a pastor, so on and so forth. And they can't relate, and I can relate to a lot of stuff. And I tell people that it's okay to not be okay. And no, there is no such thing as a perfect Christian ever.
Yeah.
And a lot of Christians forget that.
Yeah, true. I tell you what, brother, there's a big part of this thing. If I had to use one word to describe the big part of it, it's real. Is that I think we crave for real stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
part of it is that I believe that there's a lot of Christians who put like you were saying, is like they put on this mask or whatever, like their life is perfect.
Yeah.
Or they put on a mask like, well, that no problems, they got everything figured out. And and I think that's the one thing that we're sick of. I've used this statistic a lot, but it's true. About 20%, no matter where you're talking about in the United States in general, only about 20% of people go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not
Yep.
anti-church. I'm just telling you what people really want is real.
Yep.
When you were telling your story earlier, and you're talking about your being married the first time and you working out of town, and you said that, man, I didn't cheat on her, but I drank too much. Well, me, I cheated.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And I drank too much.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so part of that, I spent a lot of my life being embarrassed and never wanting to say that. And I'm just at the point where, man, if there's any impact that we have on each other's lives, especially other men, and I think I'm hitting on that point. I think that's really important because
Mm-hmm.
I think what other men want from men is honesty. And
Yeah.
they want real.
Yeah.
I could think about, I mentioned my best friend earlier that's a welder, and dude, I've been friends with him since high school. We've been friends for 35 something, 8 years, I don't know. But the bottom line is that I remember a lot of our friendship, I wasn't real and honest with them about what was
Mm-hmm.
going on. And I think if I was actually real and honest with them, dude, I think there might have been different outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that wasn't God's will and plan. It's fine. I'm not regretful about it. But I think that that's what we really want is real. And man, back to my point is that I think you are a real guy, and I hope you keep that up, brother, because I think that that's important. That's what guys want.
Yeah, and that's one of the things my wife talked about. Like I said before, she really helps me out and gives me some ideas. And every podcast I do, I'm like, hey, listen to it. And sometimes she's like, oh my gosh, but she'll listen to it. And one of the feedback she gave me early on is, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Talk about the stuff that you went through, because people can relate to that. And that's the whole purpose of it is, there's been some low times in my life that just they sucked, man.
Yeah.
And everybody, guys, always, we all go through these low points that just absolutely suck, and it's dark, and you feel alone, like you're the only person this is ever going to happen to, and it's and going back to what we talked about earlier, there's no way out. So they do something to fix it.
Yeah.
To fill that void or to just end it because they can't take it anymore. So I try, I have a core group of guys in my church that come to my group, and we talk about, the relationship with our kids or, family members that are sick. And some of them, there's some stuff that they talk about that's like some stuff you just wouldn't have a conversation with, but it's a real safe space for guys. And my pastor once called it a support group for men. And when he said that, I was a little upset. I was like, that sounds so sissy. Like, it's not a support group. But stepping back and looking at it, that's exactly what it is, because we're there to pick each other up no matter what's going on, to help each other through it. And my group's not like a Bible study. We just talk about the stuff that's going on in our head. And we of course look at some scripture and stuff and point to some things, but I try not, especially if I'm witnessing or talking to somebody about my faith, I don't carry my Bible around like a club. I try to be genuine, and because I'm not the type of person that can just pull scripture out of the air. There's some verses that I remember, the big one, John 3:16 and Philippians 4:13. And, there's a few of them, but that's not what I'm called to do. And people are sick of that type of stuff. So I was like, I'm going to flip the script and do something different. So.
Well, a great job, man. It's funny because you bring up, there's two things that I think you brought up that are like really important to highlight. Number one is vulnerability. Like, I think that when we're talking about men's relationships and, mental health, whatever, I always say I can't speak for a woman. I have daughters, but, and it's hard for me to completely relate, but I can relate to other men. And I think that something that's needed in men's relationships is vulnerability. And the second that you brought up is basically a community or a tribe, or something. I mean, you call it what you want to call it, but a group of guys, you can basically spend time. I mean, you can do that through Bible study, that, of course. And I think obviously that's a great one. And there's other ones too. And I think that that's an important thing that you don't, in other words, if you're not going to a church and you don't have that, because some churches may not have it like that. There's other areas you can find those group of men, but that relationship, those groups are huge for mental health.
Yeah.
Like huge. And I'll tell you something, it's like you probably heard me say it, but it's like I've been stuck on it recently, which is, man, the problems we're talking about, like, when Jesus came here, he was dealing with the physical. Everything was physical, everything. He healed people. Later, they died. I think that's important to people to realize.
Right.
The point is that it was all physical. It was like physical here now. And now everything that we're dealing with now, ever since Jesus and all that, the cross and everything, is we're dealing with spiritual.
Yeah.
Back to even what Maya was asking you, and we were talking about at the beginning, that you have, that we're made to be warriors, but yet we're not in a war. Well, the answer is spiritual.
Yeah, and that spiritual warfare is a very, very real thing.
Well, I'm sorry. It's just, I was going to say, take the drinking thing. It is really a spiritual issue, and there's only one spiritual solution to that. basically God. We know that. But then what we struggle is to connect those dots, and how do we live like that? How do we deal with life, normal, mundane, got to change the kid's diaper. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because, real life, I mean, there's exciting moments throughout life, first car, child being born, stuff like that. But for the most part, life is kind of boring. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
your day, going to work every day it can be a drag, right? Like it can wear you down. So you need something. And I think that's where the warrior aspect of us comes out a little bit, is we need something more.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that something more isn't God the Father. It's, something else to fill that void, gambling and whatever it is. And, and I'm not saying, one of the things we've got into disagreements about is, drinking in general. I don't drink because I don't want to witness or have somebody come over to my house that's struggling with drinking,
Right.
and see, beer in my refrigerator or alcohol bottles on the wall or whatever, so that's why, God put me in this position for a reason. And I want to be a good example to people more than anything,
Yeah.
because of the whole lead by example. Completely lost train of thought. Lost it completely.
Well, I think that, your point is that, these relationships and what we're trying to do is like, it's super important. So I'm curious, what's kind of your goal? I mean, well, let me ask you this. How can, like, anybody listening to this podcast, I mean, how can they get in touch with you? How can they connect with you? Tell them the different ways. I want them to be able to do that.
Okay. Well, so I have an email. It's the Brotherhood Mentality Mission at gmail.com. And at all of my podcasts, I say at the end, if you guys have questions, comments, things you want to talk about, things you want me to talk about, to email me. If somebody's going through something and they don't know where to turn, they don't have that men's group at their church, or they don't go to church, or they don't have that core group of people that they're around, and man, they're struggling with something like money issues, women problems, the list goes on and on. They want to talk about it. I'll talk to them about it. I don't have and will never claim to have all the answers. I've been through a lot in my life, but sometimes it's just nice to talk to somebody. I talk about it in TikTok, that just taking that stuff that's in your head and taking it off your shoulders and giving it to somebody else to look at. But the thing is, you've got to be able to be honest, upfront, and vulnerable with another person. And that is a big pill to swallow for most men, because they want to put on this persona that everything's fine. Like, nothing's going to bother me. I'm okay. I'm a man. I'm a dude. I can take it no matter what it is. I'll figure it out. But sometimes you got to take that guard down, and talk about what you got going on. So you can email me, and then also on TikTok, anybody can message me on TikTok. I got a Facebook page that I don't do a whole lot with. I kind of just share the stuff that I post on TikTok on there. And every once in a while I'll have a little bit of an epiphany that I'd share on Facebook. And again, it's the same. It's the Brotherhood Mentality Mission, on Facebook. But yeah, I mean, if anybody ever wants to reach out, and I talk about a whole range of stuff, guys that are having relationship problems. I don't have all the answers to your problems, but I'll give you some of my life experience, and I will be upfront and honest with people. So if you do get a hold of me, you got to be ready for some honesty, because I don't sugarcoat anything. I'm not mean, but like, if you say, this is what I got going on, what do you think? I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to beat you with the Bible, but I'm going to, if you struggle with anxiety, I'm not going to tell you to buck up, but I'm going to tell you that a lot of times the anxiety stuff is a lot of it's in your head, and a lot of it is hypotheticals that you're concerned about. I've had one anxiety panic attack in my life, and it was debilitating. Like, I thought I was dying. Like, I felt like there was elephants sitting on my chest, and I was worried about stuff that was coming up, and I couldn't handle it, because I held everything on the inside. So yeah. So email and, of course, social media. You look me up on social media and you can message me and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. That's actually how I started following you. Christopher, the Bill Poppin preacher, he was like, hey, check this guy out. So I did. And I was like, oh, I like what you got going on. So I reached out and liked some of your stuff and here we are.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did. I appreciate it.
And I think social media is a great tool. It can be abused, obviously, but I think it's a great tool for people like me or even you that's trying to do something to help people out. It gives you such a further reach. I actually got a guy from Pakistan actually got a hold of me today and said, man, I really appreciate what you're saying. It means a lot to me. Keep up the good work, and I've never been to Pakistan. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's awesome. I don't know, I have a weird relationship with social media because, there's a part of me that hates it. And then there's a part of me that I see the it matters, social media matters. It matters on TikTok. It matters on, and I mean, there's a lot of very smart people that listen to podcasts. It's free. I mean, what else? And it's pretty amazing to me. And I think that why not? And I like to talk about, I like to have good conversation too.
And you touched on it earlier about how all but one of my episodes is by myself. And it is tough, brother. I'll tell you what, it's one of, I try to make a list of stuff I want to talk about. And then sometimes I go off on tangents and my wife's like, you did it again. And sometimes I don't circle back. Like I got this big buildup and then I'm like, oh, a butterfly over here. Like I lose it. I did one podcast with a buddy of mine from church, called Too Close to the Trees to See the Forest. And we talk about being in the moment of something and not seeing the other side of it because you're fixated on what's right in front of you. And it was one of my better podcasts that I did because it is so much easier to have a conversation with somebody other than to pick a topic and talk about it the whole time. So that's one thing that I'm looking to do and start doing a little bit more, having somebody on or something.
Well,
and,
I mean, I think you're doing great. I mean, like I said, I admire you because that's tough. And, I even have ones on mine where I went and preached somewhere and, and I go back and listen to it. I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes you feel bad about preaching because, but I was just, a part of me is like, okay, might as well put the same thing out there, so I get it. I think I'll tell you what we should do. What we should do is that, down the line we'll flip and I'll be on your.
Okay. Absolutely. I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
What we're going to talk about and you.
Yeah.
That would
absolutely.
So, well, brother, I think I knew I picked, whenever I connected with you, I knew that, Christopher was right. He's a smart man.
Yeah, for sure.
He really is. It's funny because, I really haven't known him that long and the whole thing, I think, but he picked a winner. And so that tells me that he has a good, I think he has a good eye for what's important, the details or whatever of a relationship, which is, it's hard to connect people. It really is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I ask people, I used to do it a lot more, but I'd ask people all the time on TikTok, hey, you want to be on my podcast? I mean, if I liked them, liked interest, all those things, and you'd be shocked how many people never responded, never even, or said, sorry, no, I don't do podcast. Some of my favorite people who, when I say that on TikTok really aren't have millions of followers. And you'd be surprised how many of them were like, no, I don't want to do a podcast, So I think it's amazing that you did, and I appreciate it. And
yeah, absolutely. I was really looking forward to it. My wife asked me before I got all set up. She's like, are you excited? And I was like, yeah, I'm excited. And you asked me, what my ultimate goal was, how can people get a hold of me, but also what my ultimate goal is. My ultimate goal is to tell as many guys as I can that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to be vulnerable. And then we all go through it. And, like I said about the social experiment, I did it at the church. I asked how many men have had issues with da-da-da-da-da. And then I asked how many talk about it, and nobody raised their hand. And that's the point I want to drive home. The faith stuff is super important to what I'm doing because there's so much that you can pull from the Bible that you can relate to still to this day, 2,000 years after it was written. But the biggest, most important piece to me is for men to talk about the burdens that we carry. You know, women go through a lot of stuff too, but women talk about it. Men, we don't. And I did that TikTok the other day about sitting at the kitchen table and just staring off into space. So many guys can relate to that because sometimes we just shut down because there's so much going on upstairs that we just shut it off. And that drives a wedge between you and everyone around you. There's been so many times in my life that I just was shut off on cruise control. And it's not healthy. And being vulnerable, even like I said, with the knowledge that I have, is tough for me. My wife will ask me a question, or we'll have a situation. We don't fight or anything like that. But, you know, if I dislike something that she does, or, you know, or the way she thinks or what she's doing or whatever it is, you know, she'll be like, you want to talk about it? No, you know, and she's like, why don't you, you know, I've had some issues with my ex-wife, with custody stuff and things of that nature. And I don't want to say it's been a problem with my wife, Sarah, and I, but like, I've been afraid to put my foot down because I just don't like conflict. I just, you know, you don't know how another person's going to react. I have custody of both my daughters. Yeah. And so I did. I had the super vulnerable moment with my wife about the situation because I wouldn't talk about it because I was always afraid of how she would react about how I felt, which is one of the reasons we don't talk. We don't want people to think about us a certain way. And I tell you what, after I had the conversation with her and was vulnerable and told her how I felt with what was going on, dude, I was like a whole nother person. And in doing that, it opened me up to be able to put my foot down on some stuff with my ex-wife. And it's really changed my relationship with her and my wife, because when you open up and you let people, you take down them walls and you let people see who you really are, it makes life so much easier because you don't have to carry all that stuff, you know, put it away in a box somewhere. You can just, like I say, just hand it to somebody else and be like, here, this is what I got.
I've been talking about this a lot, but I think it's worth repeating, and I'll probably like continue to do stuff surrounding this. I think that like guys realizing there's this crazy formula, and I think it really works, which is you need to be honest with yourself. And man, here to break up the mold of that, maybe type it out on your computer and then delete it after you reread it, or write yourself out you're being honest about. In other words, make a to-do of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then number two, you got to be honest with God. And again, you've heard me say it, but I'll say it again, that what we say in our head is God already knows.
Yep.
He knows all knowing. I don't need to tell him. That's a mistake. And I want to make it clear, you don't have to agree with what I'm about to say, because most people probably don't. I don't think you need to ask for forgiveness or anything. All I think you need to do is you need to be honest with God.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? And what does that look like? Well, same thing. It may be typing it out. It may be so you can read it to God, or it may be you just saying it. Whatever makes a celebration or a moment, you know, like in the Old Testament, they put stones on top of stones and made a little memorial. Whatever memorializes this in whatever private way, the whole thing's private. Right?
Absolutely.
And then
go into a room by yourself.
Third, and as equally important, is to find a trusted friend to tell. Be honest about. A trusted friend. It could, you know, let's say if you're married, let's say it's 70, 80% of the time, it should be her, probably, I'm guessing. But then you have these, I'm going to tell my best friend. I'm going to tell somebody, obviously, I trust. It could be a preacher or whoever. And I think that formula right there, brother, I think that it really works.
And one of the things you said is about praying and how God already knows your thoughts, knows your heart. it's not only is it important to be vulnerable with the people here, right? And be honest with people and upfront with people, but God knows, he knows everything, all seeing, right? He wants to hear you say it. Like there's a big submission to him when you pray. And I talk about in my podcast, pray. And I pray a lot. I pray before meals, before I go to bed. Sometimes when I strike an arc welding out on the pipeline before I weld on a live gas, I pray. I'm the type of person that believes whatever's going to happen is going to happen. It's my time, but I still pray. It gives me peace of mind. And then when I'm done doing what I'm doing, I thank him. And there's sometimes when I pray and I have nobody has to pray perfect, right? Your prayer doesn't have to be biblical, and you don't have to use, King James version. Like, just talk to him like you and I are talking.
Yeah.
And I do. And I have conversations with him. I'll talk to him in my truck driving down the road. And sometimes in doing that, and thanking him and thinking about a moment when a prayer was answered or something, man, I look up and I smile and I'm like, man, thank you. Because some people would be like, it's a coincidence that your prayer was answered. No, I absolutely do not believe in that. I think everything does happen for a reason. And, the TikTok I did yesterday, I think it was about how I prayed about finding a new job and coming home and work. Well, I didn't get a new job, but the place I'm employed brought me home. And that's an answer. That's not really what I kind of wanted. A new job, do something different. That's not what God had in store for me. But what he did have in store for me was what I needed. And that's to be home and tucking my kids in at night and just hanging out with them. I love it. And they're happy that I'm home. And I'm, my wife's happy that I'm home. I can help her out, getting the kids places and stuff. Prayer, I think there's got to be a little bit of asking for forgiveness for some stuff, but there's a thing with that is if you ask for forgiveness or something, that's telling God, like, I'm going to change. I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah. Whatever the sin may be, drinking or watching pornography or whatever your vice is.
Right.
But if you say it and don't mean it and continue to live that life, there's no point in doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be vulnerable with him and be honest with him. And he wants to hear you cry out and be faithful and live like Jesus, walk like Jesus, feel like Jesus felt, and love like Jesus loved.
Yeah. Well, brother, I appreciate you so much for being on this podcast. And I hope you realize that, and I mean this, that, if we're really smart, we stay connected and we
absolutely
continue to look for things to do. And I think that, basically you have a friend, and, if you ever are in Oklahoma, brother, you and your family have a place. And by the way, we have a ranch.
I see that. Yeah. A lot of cattle. I like that. That's cool.
Buddy, we'd be riding horses and having the best time ever. And you'd have a great place to stay.
And I bet there's some good barbecue down there in Oklahoma.
Yeah. So, man, if you guys are ever, plan a vacation or something, and we'd love to have you. And
absolutely,
you have a friend, I promise you. And
yeah.
So let's stay connected.
I definitely want to keep this relationship going. I think, like I said, everything happens for a reason. I think this is a real unique way that you and I got synced up. And I think there's a reason for us getting synced up. I want to have you on for a podcast. I'll pick a topic, give you a little bit of heads up what we're going to talk about, and, just roll with it and do one, see how it goes. We can do this again, and you can have me up, pick a topic and we'll do something, other than just what I'm trying to do.
Do it multiple times too.
Yeah, this is great. I really enjoyed it. I'm happy to meet you. And someday I hope I get to meet you in person.
Yeah. Well, brother, whenever this comes out, it usually comes out on Monday. We're assuming it's going to be maybe Monday. And as soon as it's out, though, I will forward it to you and try to do as much as I can. If you'll do me the same favor, just help get the word out about what I'm trying to do with the TikTok, and also what I'm trying to do with this podcast, because, it goes without saying, I do this because, my family's life has been really affected by suicide, and we're talking about all men, and I want to make a difference about that. I want to help with that. And I want to be deadly serious about it, And so if you can help me get the word out too,
Absolutely. Yeah. When you get it posted, I'm going to share it on all my platforms, and I'll even talk about it on TikTok and give them your information and where they can find it and stuff. And, I'll do a little advertising for you. This was great. I think this was really good. I think this was good for both of us. And I think it's good for what we're both trying to do, because suicide, you're right. It's deadly serious. I had a guy that was going to my group. He didn't commit suicide, but he did overdose. He relapsed and ultimately passed away from it. And he was going through some stuff. And even though he was coming to group, man, he was real quiet and wasn't, how you doing today? And he was like, I'm fine. And he wasn't, man. He was going through it, and he was afraid to let it out. So I think what you and I both are trying to do is super important, and I'm really glad, like I said, that we got synced up. I think this is awesome.
That's great. All right, brother. Hope you have a great evening. Thank you for taking the time, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Positively Undefeated. If there was something in this show that resonated with you, please share the show with your community. If you want this show delivered each Monday morning to your podcast app of choice, please subscribe or follow. And if you'd like to get a hold of Burl, please do so by going to burlstricker.com/contact.